So hi everyone.
Hello.
Yay, yay, shalom, shalom. So I want to start with just take a deep breath, center yourself in your seat, and just allow yourself to be present. Lots of things going on out there, but we're just here. And close your eyes if you're willing to do it. And take a deep, deep breath. Just allow the place, the peace of the place to overwhelm you. Just to feel the peace, the love in the room, the joy in the room. And to allow yourself to be at peace. And we open our hearts to acceptance, to sharing, to listening. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. Once more. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. Hi, Kathy. We miss having you here, so hi. And by the way, when we sing here, you sing at home too, I gotta tell you. So here's how you know you're in a different kind of a Jewish class, because I only have 3 books tonight. I've got the regular Jewish joke book, right? This one, the little guy. I brought the big Jewish joke book, right? And I have a book by a defrocked priest. So how's that for credentials, huh? So, yeah, it's a fabulous book, just fabulous, I gotta say. So we're gonna start. How do we start? We always start with what? Jokes. We gotta do some jokes, and the last one's a good one. Before I tell you the jokes, I'm gonna, I don't wanna ruin the joke for you, but you have to know that in recent years, just to say from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, a lot of young Jewish people have been disaffected in the sense of spiritually. In other words, they didn't feel they were getting spirituality from Judaism. And a lot of them have turned in part to Buddhism, which is how you get Jew booze, right? So just so you know that that's a thing, okay?
It is a thing.
It is a thing, yeah. Without ruining a joke. So 2 Jewish men are sitting on a bench, and one starts to tell the other one a joke. One day he says, Cohen and Levine were going. Oh, his friend stops him. Cohen and Levine, Cohen and Levine. That's all your jokes are about Jews. Why don't you tell a joke about Chinese people for once? His friend is shocked, but he says, okay, I'll try. One day, Su Lung Mu and Mao Tzu Nu were going to Su Lung Nu's nephew's bar mitzvah. I like that one. An Israeli mayor, you have to understand, one of the differences in Israel and the surrounding neighbors is the relative position of women in the country. I mean, Golda Meir was the prime minister for years. Israeli women serve in the military. So Israeli women get a certain amount of respect, right? I mean, if she's carrying a rifle, okay, you got to respect her, right? So, so this is a little bit of a joke about that. An Israeli mayor is walking past a construction site with his wife. One of the construction workers calls out to the woman, "How you doing, Ofra?" "Oh, good to see you, Itzik," the woman answers. She introduces the construction worker to her husband, and they chat pleasantly with him for a few minutes. After they walk away, the mayor says to his wife, "How do you know that man?" "Oh," she says, "we were sweethearts in high school. He even proposed to me once." Her husband laughs. "You should be very grateful to me then. If I hadn't come along today, You be the wife of a construction worker. Oh, not at all, the wife answers. If I had married him, he would be the mayor now. So this is a sweet joke. It's too bad Judy's not here. She loves this joke. So, an elderly Jewish woman sets out from her home in Brooklyn for India. She travels by foot over hilltops and mountains. She crosses valleys and streams, and finally she arrives in a small rural village alongside a steep mountain. At the top of the mountain is an ashram, housing a great spiritual leader, the Baba Ganoush. It takes all the woman's determination and many long hours to reach the mountaintop. There she announces that she has come to see the great guru. Oh, the guru's assistant tells her, that's impossible. Nobody is allowed to see the great guru for the next 6 months. Oi, she says, I must see him. The old woman cries, and she sits on the doorstep of the ashram without food or water for 3 full days. The keeper of the gate is desperate and finally makes her an offer. Okay, you can go in to see our leader, but you must promise to say no more than 3 words. The woman promises, and the man leads her down a long marble walkway. Tapestries and flowing fabrics cover the walls. They turn into a room, and at the end of the hall, enter through an archway, and there's a young man sitting on a bamboo mat in the yoga position, chanting Om Shanti, Om Shanti. The woman steps in front of him and says, come home, Sheldon. So there you go. That's not that outlandish of a joke either. So, oh, look who else. Peggy's there. So we have music with Giora Feidman, F-E-I, it's not Friedman, it's Feidman. I don't know.
The mama one?
Maybe the one, there's like the mother-in-law, but I think there's one before that.
Mothers-in-law is 12.
What's before? What's 11?
11 is Elecham Dalibi.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but we'll try that one. This is Giora Feidman. We'll know in a minute. Amazing clarinet. Listen to the clarinet, how the clarinet laughs. You can hear it. More volume. This is the desires of my heart, Chamda Libi. No, no more, a little more. Oh, soon, because I was like, it kind of winds up, it gets going, gets like. Can you fast forward a little bit? If not. No. Okay. You get it? How can you not dance, right? So this is wedding music, right? This is the wedding music. Okay, enough. So what's the other one? This one is a sweet one too. Is that the mother-in-law one? Listen to the mother. Let's just listen to this one for a second. Just imagine a large mother-in-law. like walking down the steps, right? Okay, I think they got it. I think you got it. So it's wonderful. So have you heard music like that before much? You've heard a little bit here and there, yeah. So I love it. Klezmer music. So I want to review a little bit, and I want to, and I also made some handouts for you today. So we'll go into all this stuff. So how many have your guides? You know, most of you have your guides. You don't have your guide.
No,
You never got a guide?
No, I got one. I just left it.
Ah, got it. Okay. So what I want to do is I can kind of give you one, I think,
Oh,
for
okay.
today.
I can give it back to you if you need it.
Sure. So I want to go to week 5, which was last week, and go over the first 2 or 3 concepts, not the concepts, the questions. So to see where we are, because I want to really make sure that, so someone wants to read the question. It was what? How does it go?
What was the profound and world-changing message of the prophets Amos, Micah, Jeremiah, and Isaiah?
What was the world-changing message of the prophets? So anybody want to take a crack at that?
God did not want sacrifice. He
Right.
wanted
Relationship, acts of mercy, kindness, justice, take care of the widows, the orphans, feed the hungry, take the poor into your home, that kind of thing, right? So as opposed to sacrifices. So what's the second question on there?
Why did the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom disappear from history, but the two and a half tribes of the southern kingdom remain faithful to Torah and their heritage?
Back of the room. Is it, remind me? Deborah, yeah.
That had to do with the prophets, that the southern kingdom, I think southern kingdom had one tribe, but they had 149 years of teaching under the prophets, where the other 10 tribes that were to the north.
Exactly. Why did the 10 tribes disappear? Because they were conquered by the Assyrians at the same time that the prophets were prophesying.
Oh, wow.
So they didn't have the time that Judea had to absorb the message, to percolate the message through their consciousness, and to change how they practice their religion, basically. So, and what was the third question on there?
What is the answer to the question posed in Psalm 137?
What's the question posed in Psalm 137? How can we sing our God's song in a strange land, right? How can we do that? That's what they wanted to know when they were in Babylonia 2,600 years ago. How can we sing? Because they didn't have the temple in Babylonia. They couldn't bring sacrifices in Babylonia. So how could they survive? And the answer to that question is the rest of Jewish history. It's everything they figured out to do to be able to practice a religion that was as close to the original as they could figure out. So I want to hand out to you, and these are for you to keep. So I printed, I think this is enough for this row. These are timelines, and thank you to, here, I'll give to the next row. You can skip to your row, and then, so this is kind of the your row. You need to stretch a little bit. Oh, and I'm negative for COVID, yay. So hope everybody else is. And also to Deborah back there. So, do I want to talk to you? You can have a timeline. I printed a few extra ones. So on the back is something else. So I want to go through the timeline really briefly. So 930 roughly is the breakup of the northern and southern kingdom. Remember, we had Rehoboam, which is Rehoboam, I think in English, and forced labor and scorpions and floggings and disrespect, and that was enough to do it. Okay, so That was the breakup of the kingdoms. The prophets begin to prophesize about 765 BC. So 100 and whatever that is, 170 years later. Amos was the first, Jeremiah was the last. They preach a new message. God does not want sacrifice, but justice, acts of righteousness, caring for the poor. We talked about that. A few years later, 722, the destruction of the northern kingdom, the dispersion in Assyria, the 10 lost tribes. I just wanted to make sure that we cover this. I think last week, in an effort to kind of catch up, I might have went a little too fast and lost some people. So that's why I did this, right? So 140 years between the Assyrian destruction of the northern kingdom and the Babylonian conquest of the southern kingdom gives enough time for the prophetic message to percolate into the consciousness and culture of the southern kingdom of Yehudah. The remaining tribes of Judah and Benjamin and part of Levi are the southern kingdom. 586, the Babylonians come along. It wasn't bad enough the Assyrians came along. Now the Babylonians show up and they conquer the southern kingdom and put the Jews into exile in Babylonia. 50 years later, only 50 years later, the rise of Persia, the conquest of Babylonia by Persia, which we'll get to tonight. And we're going to stop here on the timeline for right now because we're back to the class. But the rise of Persia, the conquest of the Babylonians, and what that does to and for the Jews, we're going to find out. So I want to go to what did the prophets preach? It's on the next, in the back of the other page, you have it. You see what it says, prophetic quotes. Anybody want to read one?
Melinda on Zoom is raising her hand.
Melinda.
I don't know if that's actually Melinda.
Oh, someone had, so question, so unmute yourself.
Yeah.
We can't hear you yet, Melinda. You have to unmute yourself.
That better?
Yeah, that's a lot better. Let me turn you up so that people here can hear your question.
Okay. I don't have a question. I don't have a question. I was
Yeah.
just saying that I don't have the handout.
I know. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we'll have to get them to you, but they're
Yeah.
just one sheet and one sheet. So we'll
Okay.
have to figure out how to get them to you. So maybe you can send Judy your address. We can mail them to you.
Yeah.
Or I can email it to you too.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Sounds
I realized just like 5 minutes before the class that people online would not have it, but we're kind of going over it too a little bit. So, but it's
Yeah.
a wonderful resource to have.
Yeah. It's okay. I can follow
We'll
along.
get it to you. Okay.
Yeah.
So, oh, listen to this. Oh, maybe we could. It's coming from the hallway, maybe. Yeah, but I think it's coming through the hallway.
Like hallway speakers.
I know, but okay. You know what? She sounds good, huh? Maybe we should just listen and pray a little bit. So let's look at these quotes, which might surprise you, might not. Who wants to take a crack at Hosea, the first one? Nobody? Yes.
Hosea 6:6. For I desire goodness, not sacrifice, obedience to God rather than burnt offering.
Okay, does that seem pretty straightforward? Doesn't seem very wishy-washy, or you kind of can read it one way, right? Who wants to read Isaiah? Go ahead.
I am sated with burnt offerings of rams and suet of fatlings and blood of bulls, and I have no delight in lambs and he-goats.
No lambs and he-goats, okay. And suet, you know what suet is? Suet is like fat around the kidneys. Yeah, it's animal fat, right? So what does Amos have to say? Amos, who wants to read that one? Yeah.
If you offer me burnt offerings or meal offerings, I do not want them, will not accept them. I will not pay heed to your gifts of fatlings. Spare me the sound of your hymns, and let me not hear the melodies of your lutes, but let justice well up like water, righteousness like an unfailing stream.
Do you recognize this quote? from a very famous speech, one of the most famous speeches ever given in this country, Martin Luther King, on the steps of the Capitol, right? Martin Luther King, right? So he quoted Amos, Micah 6:6-8. What shall I? Now this Amos seems to be critical also of prayer. It's interesting. No melodies or lutes and that kind of thing. So very interesting. Micah says, with what shall I approach the Lord? Do homage to God on high? Shall I approach him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Would the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with myriads of streams of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for my sins? I think we've covered that a long time ago with the absolute outlawing of child sacrifice, right? He has told you, oh man, what is good. And the word I looked at the text in Hebrew because I changed the translation a little bit from the JPS, so it's a little more accurate as far as I'm concerned. So the word in Hebrew is Adam, what is good and what the Lord requires, to do justice, to love goodness, and to walk modestly with your God. So this one talks a little bit about child sacrifice too. And you can see it's a continuum from child sacrifice being eliminated to animal sacrifice being eliminated also eventually. And we've seen those kinds of things in this country. 160 years ago, there was still slavery in the South. A Black person was considered 3/5 of a person and could be sold. And then Black people were emancipated, and then Native Americans were given citizenship, and then women got to vote in 1921. I mean, it's been a continuum of greater freedoms and greater rights in this country, but you also see a continuum here of moving away from sacrifices, of blood sacrifice. What is Psalm 40? Somebody want to read that for us? From King David.
You gave me to understand that you do not desire sacrifice and meal offering. You do not ask for burnt offering or sin offering. And
in the text, it says, Lamanatseach Mizmor David. It says, to the victor or to the choir master, depending how you read it, a psalm of David. So this may predate the prophets by 300 years. So this concept has been percolating a long time, in other words, because this is in Psalms. And the last one is, O Lord, open my lips and let my mouth declare your praise. So who knows? I don't see, who are the Jews in the room? A couple. So do you know this? What's this from? Adonai Sefatai Tiftachu fi yagid tehilatecha. Right. So we say this before the Amidah, before the standing silent prayer. We quote this every service. You do not want me to bring sacrifices. You do not desire burnt offerings. So it's pretty clear to me, and I hope it's clear to you, that this is a seismic shift in terms of how the religion was practiced from the temple and the Kohanic priesthood and the cult sacrifices to this, right? Does that make sense for people? Raise your hand if you're like with me on this. Do you get it? Are we together? Anybody not with me on this? Someone, yes, hi.
I just asked, when you said shift from this to this, is this part where they were to have more in relationships of kindness and doing justice?
Right.
That's what the shift
Right.
is. Okay.
Yeah, from that to this, not from this to, so yeah. See, this is all because you missed 1 week. No, I'm kidding.
I'm so
I'm pulling your leg. So basically you had, prior to this, the temple was the religion. Jerusalem was the religion. And the Temple Mount was the focus. And it was the only place you could bring sacrifices. It was illegal, in essence, to bring anywhere else. In the north, they had a temple, I think in Samaria, but that's not to do with this. We come from the southern kingdom. So this is a direct threat to the temple. Because if I don't have to bring sacrifices, I'm not going to bring sacrifices. I'm going to pray. And even King David said so. Now, why would King David be against the priesthood? Was he a priest?
No.
What was he? He was the king. Right. So there were two branches of government, right? Here we have three, but they're always fighting, aren't they? Right. We pay them to fight each other and like get nothing done. So the same thing there in those days. It wasn't much different. So the Babylonian conquest occurs. It leads to the Babylonian exile, which leads to an interpretation of the prophets as being more central to the way the religion was practiced. So 50 years after the Babylonian exile, the Persians defeat the Babylonians conclusively, okay, significantly. And Cyrus the Great is the leader of the Persians, and we have a picture of him up here. This is an actual photograph of Cyrus. It's one of the earliest photographs. So here he's looking, he's going, see, he's looking for the Afikoman. No, he's looking out and he's saying the Jews should be over here. Now, why would the king of Persia want the Jews to go home? He just liked them. He was a nice guy. He just thought, hey, you guys are good people. You should go back to your land. What was going on in the land before the Jews came back? Well, yeah, but the temple's destroyed now, so no sacrifices. What's going on in the land of the southern kingdom while the Jews are exiled in Babylonia? Jackals, wolves, wild animals. No, nothing's being planted, nothing's being harvested. Are any taxes being paid?
Repopulating?
No. So what does Cyrus want?
People to come back and make the land prosperous.
And what? He
Financially rewarding.
he can collect taxes. You can't collect from a jackal or a wolf, right? You can collect from people that are working in their fields, right? So he tells the Jews to go home and rebuild the temple. And this is relevant today, and I'll tell you why. I mean, the Persian conquest is relevant because you might not know or care that the Persians defeated the Babylonians 2,600 years ago and were the greatest power on earth. But the Iranians, who are the current day Persians, they care a lot. So I have a couple images. Now these are dated. These are old images from the hostage taking in Iran. But you'll see what I'm talking about. And so you can see this was Ahmadinejad. He was the leader of Iran for a long, long time. And this is him as a student. And this is him leading one of our hostages, right? So it might not matter to you, right, that Persia was the greatest power on earth, but it mattered to him, right? And it matters to them now. Iran is the only country on the face of the earth that is attempting to build a nuclear weapon and has threatened to annihilate another country with it. Right. Of course, we're the only one that actually did that, but that's another story. We won't dwell on that too much. So the next picture is just a close-up of the other picture. And then we have, what else? So here we have the Jews going back to, they don't look very robust in this picture. You know, they're kind of a draggy bunch, right? But they're going back to the land. They're going back with Ezra and Nehemiah are taking them back. And you can see what was left of the walls of Jerusalem. You can just see a little vague kind of impression of Jerusalem.
Well, they would have spent 70 years, citywide, wouldn't they? So.
They would have been, about 70 years. They went back about 517 or so. So they were gone about 70 years, right? So, yep. And the temple's rebuilt in about the year 515 or so. And Israel, which is to say the southern kingdom of Judah, becomes a center of Judaism, and Babylonia becomes a center of Judaism. Just like today, the Jewish world is essentially bipolar, right, in more ways than one. Israel has, maybe 8 million Jews, and America has about 6 million. And then, in other words, America has, 40%, Israel has 50%, and the other 10% are just wherever, Canada, New Zealand, a few Jews in Scotland, like wherever they are. They're all over the place. France has a few, Canada has some, but really America is the center of gravity of Judaism, and so is Israel today. So you have two centers of gravity for Judaism. So Ezra and Nehemiah bring the Jews back, and we still carry, for the Jews in the room and for the non-Jews too, we still carry with us certain elements of Babylonian culture, which not many people realize. When I showed you the Torah, right, we brought the Torah in the third week, those letters are Babylonian script. Those letters are from Babylonian, right? We call it Hebrew, it is Hebrew, but the letters are Babylonian. Just like when you write Yiddish in Hebrew letters, also Babylonian letters. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the name of the months. We have Nisan and Adar and Shvat and Tevet and Tammuz and so forth and so on, Elul. And all of the Jewish months, the names are Babylonian names. So we carry with us. Every time the Jews interact with another culture, we hopefully enrich that culture in a certain way and are enriched by that culture in return. And we just keep rolling, right? We just take a little bit from here, and we still have that from 2,600 years ago. We have a remnant of Babylonian culture that we keep in our culture, which most Jews don't even realize it comes from Babylonian times. So just as, yes, Jen.
Can you expand about the everyday language, the Aramaic language?
Well, yes. I mean, that was the language. That was, well, it was really for the whole Middle East.
Okay.
Spoke Aramaic at that time. It was kind of a Esperanto of the Middle East, was Aramaic. But yeah, it was spoken at this time. And of course, the Jews, when they left Israel, they went to Babylonia. I mean, what language am I speaking, right? I'm not speaking Yiddish. So when you come to a new country within 10 or 20 or 30 years, and certainly your children who grow up there speak that language. There was a Russian girl, remember in Chabad, there was a Russian girl, I forget her name, but she emigrated, she came to America when she was in 9th grade. She knew no English, zero, okay? She graduated, she was the valedictorian of her high school. So in 4 years, she not only learned English, she learned English, right? I mean, she was the valedictorian, she gave this, commencement talk. I mean, she was perfect. But, at that age, you can do that. If you come when you're 14 or 15, you can still do that. After about 18, 20, you're going to have accented English no matter what you do, right? Almost for sure. So the letters and the months we keep a few other things from Babylonia, but the sun, I say, is setting in the east and rising in the west. What do I mean by that? The power from Mesopotamia is waning. You had the Assyrians, you had the Babylonians, you had the Persians. That power is waning, and what's rising in the west is Greece. Exactly right. Alexander the Great, and I never understood it, but he was the Prince of Macedonia, right? His father was King Philip. He could have stayed home, had a beautiful Greek wife, and had wonderful little Greek children, and he could have had a wonderful life. But he says, I want to go conquer the world. Like, what? Like, why? I don't get it. But he just had to bug up his, and he wanted to go conquer the world, and he did, too. He did. He conquered all the way to what's now Pakistan. He conquered most of the Indus Valley, all the way to the middle of India. He conquered, and then he returned to Babylonia, and then he got sick and he died. He had children. He had 3 or 4 wives, but the wives, started fighting with each other, and all the wives ended up getting killed. All the kids all ended up getting killed. And so there's this huge empire, and who's going to inherit it? The generals inherit it, basically. Ptolemy and Seleucid, and that's who. But Alexander is so great and so well known, we even know the name of his horse, right? We know his horse was Bucephalus. We know the name of his horse, which I always thought was amazing. So, and why in particular should Christians care about Alexander the Great?
because the Bible was translated into Greek.
It was translated into Greek, and the Junior Testament, which I call the Junior Testament, the Senior and the Junior Testament was written in what language? Greek. Hello. So you think there's going to be a little influence there, right? The language is very powerful, right? So there's it's written in Greek, and there's two halves of the empire. So I'll show you the two halves.
Peggy says blame his teachers, but his father is also a conqueror.
Blame his teachers.
Alexander the Great.
Peggy, say something. Tell us something. Enlighten us.
Supposedly Aristotle was one of his teachers. I'm trying to think of the person who taught him history, maybe Herodotus, I don't know. But Philip previously, Macedonia is not Athens, and it's not the other great Greek cities. It's Philip that went into Greece and incorporated it into Macedonia and Sparta. So his dad set that tone for him, but he also gave him the premier teachers that one could get out of the schools in Athens. So, he was a spoiled rich boy who paved out.
Right. The story goes, I wasn't going to get into this, but since you brought it up, Peggy, so the story goes that Bucephalus, the horse, someone tried to sell it to Philip, to his father. And the horse was a wild horse and couldn't be tamed. Numerous people tried to control it, to sit on it, to teach it to behave itself. It just was wild. It bucked people up and it would do all this kinds of stuff. But then young Alexander saw the horse and he realized that the horse was afraid of its own shadow. So he faced the horse into the sun, and the horse couldn't see his shadow. So then he was able to get on him and ride him. And he made a bet with his father that he could ride the horse. And his father said, well, what's the, what do I get if if you win, you get the horse. What do I get if I win? He says, he'll pay for the horse. So they had this bet. And when his father saw that he could ride the horse, he told him he needed a bigger kingdom. So possibly his father planted the seed that he needed a bigger kingdom. So my father never told that to me. He never even remotely suggested it. So anyway, so I want to show the picture of so this is Bucephalus here. He looks kind of like a wild horse, doesn't he? He's got that look in his eye. I'm not going to mess with him. And Alexander's gorgeous. There was an Alexander movie recently, wasn't there? With who? There was a big, I saw it advertised. No? Brad Pitt as Alexander the Great? I don't know. So anyway, so this is a nice image of him. This, I think, comes from a fresco on a floor or a wall, and it's Alexander and his horse. So the next image. So this is, so it was divided among three generals. So there's the Seleucid Empire, which is over here. Arabia really never was conquered. Basically, nobody wanted it. It was basically barren and sandy and whatnot. So, and the Nabateans are here, which are amazing people. You can still go in southern Israel and see Nabatean ruins at Abdat and different places. Just wonderful. And the Nabateans eventually become Christians in about the 3rd, 4th century. But they were the traders between Saudi Arabia and Gaza. So they would take camels and go through the desert, and they knew where the water was. They knew where the secret water was. And you can go in the Negev today, because the Negev is here, the southern Negev, and Gaza is up here, or Gaza is up here. So you can go today in the Negev, and our teacher, Rena, who grew up in the Negev, she would take us, and we'd be walking down this dry wadi, and it looked like water maybe ran there like a century ago. You'd never think there's any water. And we'd go and go and go. And then she would just stand there for a few minutes. And we would go like, what's going on? She goes, well, look around. We look around, we don't see anything. We look around. Finally, she points out where the water is. Like we're standing on it. There was like a rock cover with a hole in it big enough to drop a bucket into. But underneath, the Nabateans had carved out a huge pool. and it kept water all year on the hottest days, didn't matter. So the Nabateans could bring their camels and they could water their camels and they could make it across the desert. And the knowledge of where the water was their wealth. That was what they had. And they brought, from the story, gold and right, and myrrh and frankincense. Frankincense was worth more than gold. Frankincense was very valuable herb, right? So they would bring silver and gold and frankincense and myrrh and whatnot all the way across the desert to Gaza. And they bring it to Gaza. And from Gaza, you could send it to Greece and Rome and everywhere else, all across the Mediterranean. And it was very, very valuable.
Where did the spices come from?
Mostly from this part of Saudi Arabia, I believe. And then also things would come up from Africa and land here as well, and then they would take them over. So, but the spice trade was an extraordinarily valuable and rich trade for many, many centuries. The Nabateans are alive and well until the 7th, 8th, 9th century, something like that. Yeah.
And Petra, Nabateans.
Petra was Nabatean. Yeah.
You can go there and see.
You can go there, carved out of the living rock and just beautiful Petra.
And water, you wonder where's the water come from?
Right.
It's in the middle of the water.
Right, but there is. It's just amazing what they did and how they would build. Like there's what's called a Bor Mayim, which there's a be'er, which is a well, and then there's bor, which is what's it in English?
Cistern?
A cistern. Yes, it's a cistern. I mean, it's not a cistern for like now we have a cistern. This was cisterns for fresh water. And the way it was done is they would underneath the city, they would carve out a huge cistern, and you can still see in Tel Sheva. The cistern was built maybe 3,000 years ago. You can still see the handprints because they put like a plaster over it so that it would be waterproof. So they plastered it with waterproofing, and you can still see the handprints and even some fingerprints from 3,000 years ago. But it's underneath, and they had to make it. Let's see, it had to be the entrance to it was high enough so that mud and debris wouldn't come in, but it was low enough that when the wadi ran, it would fill up. And then there were something like 200 or 300 steps from the middle of the city coming down to it to get the water. And then the outside was always disguised incredibly well, so no one knew where the entrance was. Because if they could get in from the underneath, then they could walk up the steps just as quickly as you could and invade the city that way, right? So they had to make all this elaborate hiding of where the entrance was to the Bor Mayim. But anyway, never mind that. So the story of the Greeks and the Jews, Alexander conquers Israel in about 332 BC or so, and he conquers Israel as part of the whole thing of conquering the Persians, right? The Persians conquered the Babylonians, the Greeks conquered the Persians. And the story of the marathon, and the stories. There were great Greek battles with the Persians, and the Greeks were victorious. And they conquered the entire area, right? So they come into the land, and the Greeks, there's a nice little saying, okay, that the Greeks worship the holiness of beauty, and the Jews worship the beauty of holiness. It's a nice phrase, and there's a lot of truth to it. But the Greeks brought with them Hellenism. They wanted everyone to be Greek. They wanted gymnasiums. They wanted to have Greek philosophy, which the Jews accepted some of it. And they wanted to have basically to Greekify or Hellenize everything that they conquered, right? And this sets up a real problem for the Jews. And by the way, we still have remnants, just like we have remnants from Babylonia, we have remnants from Greek. In fact, the word synagogue itself is Greek, right? The afikomen, which is the what you hide at Passover time and the kids find, or sometimes the parents have to find it, that's Greek. And you find a lot of Jews named Alex, right? I had a first cousin named Alex, Alexandra. So you find a lot of Jews still naming after Alexander the Great, right? You see Alex everywhere. But the Greeks had gymnasiums, and they would wrestle naked. That was how they would wrestle. And Jewish boys wanted to wrestle too. Why not? Why should the Greeks have all the fun? But the Jewish boys couldn't wrestle. Why not? Why not?
Because they were circumcised.
Because they were circumcised. So they were deformed in a certain way. They were no longer perfect. So they were not eligible to practice in the gymnasiums. So because of that, you have a conflict, right? I have, like, for example, in America, it's very similar, right? I had friends in the Orthodox community. Later on, they went to public high school like I did, and they wanted to play football. A couple of them were pretty big, right? Not me, but I was the photographer of the football team. I wasn't playing. I tried out one year and I didn't go very well. I was kind of like squished. So, and I was not even this big then. So basically, they wanted to go out for a football team. When are the games?
Friday night.
Friday night. When is Shabbat? Friday night. Can you play football Friday night? No. You think that made a little conflict between 16-year-old Chaim and his mother and father? I don't care. I'm going to play football. I don't care what you say. Blah, slam the door. You know, you can see where it would begin to fracture the people because you have this internal conflict. And the same thing happened in a long time ago, 2,300 years ago, with the gymnasiums and the circumcisions, right? And the Greeks didn't just have that. They had statues, they had idols, they had Greek gods. And the Jews are split into three camps. You have basically Pharisee, Essene, and Sadducee, which is essentially accommodate, assimilate, or live apart. Those are your three choices, right? So I'll get to that in a minute. So this creates, also today in America, you have the same exact thing. You have Jews that are completely assimilated. They don't follow anything Jewish or do almost anything Jewish. You have Jews that accommodate, right? I accommodate, right? In other words, I love college football, right? I grew up on it. My father loved college football, Penn State especially. So I watch college football. When is college football? It's on Shabbat, right? So sometimes I have a service at 10 o'clock in the morning and Penn State is playing, but I have to do my service because I schedule it, right? But other times I get to watch it, right? So it's a conflict and it's a struggle and we accommodate, right? So, and not just that. I mean, I remember when I was a boy, it was just like when I was about 10 is when they, maybe 9 or 10, they came out with the first transistor radios, right? They were small enough to put in your pocket, whatever. Well, even on Yom Kippur, yes, say what I'm going to say now, you know already.
You'd be here in this very religious service, and everyone from the synagogue is there. And maybe a dozen of the guys would have a transistor radio with the ear thing in their ear. And something would happen and you'd see the 10 of them all jump and then they'd whisper around what happened.
Home run, home
Or
run.
they'd go out into the lobby and people one by one would go out to find out what happened.
Right.
And it was just normal. I mean, it happened all the time. Or Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah, yeah, not Yom Kippur so much, but Rosh Hashanah. So what kind of a community did you grow up in? Reform, okay. So I grew up in an Orthodox community. So you didn't have 10 guys, you didn't have any earphones but there was one guy in the parking lot or somewhere, he didn't really want to go in the service anyhow. And every inning, somebody would go out and find out what the score was. And people would go, because they accommodated. In other words, we're part of America and we're Jewish. We're completely American and we're completely Jewish. How do we do it? It's tricky, but we do it. But there are other Jews who'd say, I cannot be part of this society, right? I need to be set apart. Like there's a place called Kiryas Joel, right? In New Jersey. There's a place called Muncie, New York. These are places that are really enclaves of very, very Orthodox Jews. And you don't even know you're in America anymore. You can't even, I mean, English is like maybe, it's Yiddish and everybody, they interact only with other Jews. They interact primarily in Yiddish. It's like the Amish, they set themselves apart, right? They're of America, but they're not within America in a sense, okay? So those are the people that set themselves apart, and we know them as Essenes. right? The accommodationists, us Pharisees, right? And the people who assimilated the most were the Sadducees. And here's how you remember what the Sadducees were, or who they were. What?
Sad, you see.
Yes, when the temple was destroyed, they were very sad, you see, right? Because they were the priests, they were the fat cats, they were the rich ones making their living off the temple and off the half shekel that was sent in by millions of Jews around the world, right? And by taking parts of every sacrifice and so forth and so on, right? It became corrupt. And you know it became corrupt. Jesus talks about it. It was corrupt because it was hereditary. Look what happens to King David. King David has King Solomon, who has Rehoboam, who's a disaster, right? It's a bad idea. Hereditary power transfer is a bad idea. It doesn't work, right? So democracy, we're still deciding if it's a good idea or not, but we'll.
Say those three again.
The three.
Sadducees, they're on the handout? Yeah.
They are they on the handout?
Week 6 concepts.
Oh, look at that. Wow, thank you. Okay. Week 6. That means we're into week 6 already.
Down near the bottom of the page.
Yay. So the Sadducees, you see it?
I do, but the Sadducees are the ones that what?
They were the most assimilationist because they were in cahoots with the Greeks and the Romans. They controlled the temple and the sacrifices and all the wealth that flowed through the temple, right? How many people have been to St. Peter's in Rome? Anybody? Like maybe half of us? A lot of wealth flowed through there too, didn't it? Seems to be a theme, right? I mean, churches are very wealthy, right? So, and synagogues not so much, but the temple was enormous amounts of money flowed through there. Every Jew had to send in a half shekel, and when you multiply that out, it's a lot. And then you also have the sacrifices. Pieces of them went to the Kohanim, went to the priests, and so forth and so on. So they had a very, very strong vested interest in retaining the priestly services and the priestly, when I say priestly, I mean the Kohanic services and the Kohanic cult in the temple. Does everybody get that? If you don't get that, speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay. No, I always wanted to say that at a wedding, but I never did.
Would you explain that again for me?
The whole thing?
Well, whatever you want to.
Okay. The Sadducees made their living through the temple. The Jews have 3 regalim. They have 3 pilgrimage holidays. Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. They have 3 times where they come to the temple and bring sacrifices. Anytime they commit a sin of a certain kind, they have to bring a sacrifice. Anytime they have to bring peace offerings, on and on and on. And believe me, we commit a lot of sins. So there was a constant flow of wealth through the temple, and some of it stuck, right? Some of it stuck. Now, the rules are very strict about taking any wealth out of the temple. You're not allowed to. In fact, I'll tell you how strict the rules are. If you have a half a shekel, the half shekel was a silver coin. Sometimes it had Hercules on it, because that was the accepted coin of the time in the realm. It was made of silver, and it was called hektish. It was called holy. And you weren't even allowed to benefit from it. You were not allowed to benefit from it by holding it and getting the coolness of it on a hot day.
Oh my goodness.
That's how strict the law is. You're not allowed to benefit from it in any way, even to the point of, if you take one from a closet or something on a hot day and it's cool and you can hold it and enjoy the coolness of it, you can't even do that. You're not allowed to get any benefit from it whatsoever. So all that went to the priesthood, and the priests were wealthy. You can still go to this day. They've uncovered the high priest's house in the old city in Jerusalem, and it's over 6,000 square feet. And it was filled with beautiful Grecian vases, Grecian glassware, fancy things from everywhere. And because he was a very wealthy person, because he got a piece of the action, so to speak, right? And there was a lot of wealth that flowed through the temple. Okay, did that help, Esther?
It did, thank you.
It did.
Yes.
Yay. Okay, good. So there's stress within the Jewish world over what's going on, right? There's the civil war, in essence, between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Why didn't it involve the Essenes? They weren't there. They were down by the Dead Sea, right? They left a long time ago. So the Sadducees and the Pharisees are fighting because the Sadducees want to be more Greek, the Pharisees want to be less Greek. And it starts out as a war between the two of them. And in the end, the Greeks get involved in it well. And we know that this is the Hanukkah story. This is the story of the Jewish revolt in 164 BCE, right? Against the Greeks. And also the Pharisees and the Sadducees were fighting with each other. So we can see an image, I think I have an image, yeah. So there's a famous, Eliezer, eldest son, Simon, John, and Jonathan, and Judah Maccabee. There were the five brothers of sons of Mattatyahu, of Mattathias. And Judah, I think it was Judah, the Greeks brought elephants to fight because they were total terror. I mean, if you've never seen an elephant and you're going up against elephants, you're going to run away normally. But he went under one of the elephants and put his spear up and killed the elephant. And the elephant, that's how he died. The elephant landed on it and killed
They
him.
were armored. They had armor.
They had armor around them, but not underneath. So he went under, and just like in I guess in Ukraine, they have figured out how to destroy Russian tanks. It's the same kind of a thing. It's the same idea 2,200 years later. So this conflict echoes today through us today, and it's similar to America. America is in a way Greek in a sense, the pursuit of pleasure, Epicureans is the pursuit of pleasure. In Hebrew, it's an apikoros. It's the same word. The Epicurean is an apikoros. And so you have the way that we relate to America is very similar. I mean, we talked about the World Series. I'm not going to not watch the Super Bowl, right? I'm not an Essene. I'm going to watch the Super Bowl. I'm part of this country, right? I'm going to watch movies made in Hollywood and eat health food once in a while, not last night. And then politics, I'm going to vote. Women's suffrage in 1921 is a perfect example because the first bat mitzvah happens in 1921 also. So women are empowered in the country overall, and women are empowered in the Jewish world at the same exact year, right? Mordechai Kaplan's daughter, I think her name was Judith, was bat mitzvah in 1921. It's the first time in history, and it was the first time that women could vote. So you see the parallel and the impact of America on Judaism and Judaism on America. It's the same thing, right? But at the same time she's doing that, a few years later, everybody's listening to Benny Goodman, right? So that's a Jewish clarinetist and band leader. So you have influences both ways. So this is a time, let me read from, where's my book? Hey, Judy's here, yay. Yay. You missed, come home, Sheldon. That's so good. So this is a time of strife. I'll get into that in a minute. The last sovereign of the Hasmonean dynasty. So the Hashmonaim are not supposed to be the kings or the priests either. They're supposed to be the priests, but not necessarily the high priest. But they usurp a lot of power, right? And the last, you can get a sense of how Greek the Jews became, right? Just like you had Queen Cleopatra in Egypt, who was Greek, right? You had also in Israel, you had Queen Alexandra. She's the last sovereign, right? Her husband was Alexander Yanai. He was the king. And then when he died, she became the queen. She was queen from 80 to 70 BCE. And she brought in something called universal literacy, that every Jewish boy, it wasn't universal exactly. Women didn't have to be taught, but many women were taught to read. Every Jewish boy had to read, because you couldn't read Torah if you couldn't read. And you couldn't read the prophets if you couldn't read. And you couldn't read the writings if you couldn't read. So every Jewish boy was taught to read. And if the parents didn't have enough money, the village had to take up a collection to pay for a tutor for that kid to learn how to read. But that was when it became universal that Jews knew how to read, and every Jew had to learn how to read. And that separated them in Christian Europe in the 13, 14, 15, 1600s. It separated them completely because they were universally literate and the rest of the population was about 5% literate. So very big difference there. So you have a situation where Alexandra dies and she has two sons, right? Now listen to their names. Before we know Jewish names, right? We know Shlomo, Yaakov, Yitzchak, Avram, Moshe, which actually might be Egyptian name anyway. But you have Hebrew names, like even Rechavam, and you have David, and you have all these Hebrew names. So what were the names of her sons? Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, right? So how Greek did they become? Quite Greek. Her name was Alexandra, the mom, right? The queen was Alexandra, and the sons are Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. So you know they've gone a long way to being Greek. So the sons begin to argue about who's going to be the king. And Hyrcanus says, I'm going to be the king. And Aristobulus says, I'm going to be the king. And there's no lineage in Judaism really of brothers fighting, right? Much. No. Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau, right? You name it, right? So the brothers begin to fight. And this is a really bad idea, right? Because they invite the Romans to settle the dispute. The Romans can decide who's going to be the king. So let me tell you what this is like. This is like a cow is arguing with a goat, and they ask a lion to settle it. What's the lion going to do? Eat them both. Exactly. And that's what happened. Enormous mistake. Next time you're arguing with a goat, don't call a lion to settle it, right? They eat them both. So in the year 63, which is about 7 years after Queen Alexandra dies, she's a really wonderful queen. She was 10 years. She brought in universal literacy. Her brother was a rabbi, pretty famous rabbi. So she was a very enlightened monarch. She was quite wonderful. And 7 years after she dies, the Romans conquer Judea, and the rest is history. So, and I actually had a book to bring that I didn't bring. I don't see it here. So, doggone. I'll read you next time about the viciousness of Rome. But you know, I think we don't appreciate how vicious Rome was, and how cruel Rome was, and how brutal Rome was, because Rome was all those things. And Rome was extraordinarily corrupt and extraordinarily powerful. And the Jews, in Judea were a relatively small population and a very small province of Rome. But they were put under procurators. Herod was an Idumean. Herod was a Jew, but he was part of a century before. The Idumeans were the only people that were ever forced to become Jews. They were converted by the sword. It was never done before, it was never done since, but it was done at that time. So he comes from a bad act, if you will, on the part of the Jews, right? They converted the Idumeans, and out of the Idumeans comes Herod the Great, or the not so great, depending on where you look, how you look at it. And there's procurators, there's oppression, there's murder, there's corruption in the temple, there's collaborators, right? You have the Sadducees who are corrupted by Rome because they're part of the power structure. And you have the Pharisees who are quietly trying to fight Rome. And then you have the Essenes who just said, I'm out of here and I'm at the Dead Sea and leave me alone, right? And this is the world that Yoshki, Jesus, is born into. And I call him Yoshki because that's his Yiddish name. That's how we say it in Yiddish. And that's how my grandmother said it to me. And she always said it with affection, just so you know. It's like, Yoshki was one of ours, you know, he was like one of our boys, right? So, and that's right. And so I always say Yoshki, so you can hear I think you can hear the affection in it. So we're going to talk about him in a Jewish context. Okay, we're going to speak about him as a Jew, right? So, and I want to make sure that we're all together on this, open hearts and loving each other and listening to each other. And it's a very difficult thing to discuss across religious lines. So is everyone comfortable in the room for us to talk about Yoshki as a great Jewish man, but as a Jewish man? Are we good? Any problems? No problem. Okay, good. Okay, because he is traditionally absent from Jewish practice. You don't hear much about him in Jewish practice. You hear more about him in my synagogue than in almost any other synagogue, because I talk about him once in a while in a positive way. But you really, if you went to an Orthodox synagogue, doesn't exist. You ever see him in your prayer book? Never. You ever hear about him from the sermon from the rabbi? Never. So so the Jews, in a sense, have been disenfranchised from one of our great people of all time. This is a shame. And the Christians don't understand him as a Jew. And this is also a shame. So we have two major misunderstandings or lack of understanding that maybe we can work on a little bit here today. So let me see good, we have good time, we're good. So anything about what we covered, because we're like rolling along here. Questions about the Northern Kingdom, the Southern Kingdom, the prophetic stuff, the left turn of the religion, that kind of thing. Anything? No. Okay.
Just briefly.
Yeah.
You can touch on. I know you called it the prophetic when they came and warned them, but what about the prophetic word that supposedly still stands, like Daniel?
Daniel's an interesting one because Daniel's one of the very few things that's actually mostly in Aramaic. It's an interesting book and it's difficult to read it, difficult to understand it. So, but we say, when we do the Haftarah, when we read from the prophets, right? When we say the blessing, right? It's all that the prophets are, that it's all true, that it's all right, that it's all. How does it go? Right? So that it's all true, that the prophets are correct and true today, right? So I will draw you what happened. So I forgot to do this, and we went to a lot of trouble to get this blackboard, which is to say, Jan went to a lot of trouble to get a blackboard. So, okay, wow, very good. Now we're going to rotate the computer. There you go. So you have biblical Judaism, and I always draw it down. I don't know why. This is just how I draw it. So biblical Judaism is here. This is biblical Judaism. Around the year 700, 600, 500, 400, 300, the prophets are preaching, and the prophets are, in a sense, undermining the temple, right? and the and the sacrifices in the temple, right? So this becomes a prophetic leg, right? The Jews in Babylonia sent money back to the temple, but they didn't always go there and bring a sacrifice because it was too far and too difficult and too long and everything else. And besides, their camels were not air conditioned, right? And then you have a few hundred years where you still have the temple sacrifices here. So this is biblical Judaism. And I drew too much here. Sorry. This is the prophetic leg. And off of that leg comes two things: modern Judaism and Christianity. Okay, that's what comes off of that leg. And this dies. Rome kills it, right? The destruction of the temple, there is no more biblical Judaism. There are no more sacrifices. The priesthood is demoted in essence. And this happens over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. But you have two offshoots from this leg, and one is Judaism, the way we practice it now, rabbinic Judaism, and you have also Christianity, right? And JC, it's interesting because you get a nice initial there. You can think of somebody, right? So you have these two offshoots, right? And you can see that Judaism, as we practice it, percolated, and I think the word I use is germinate, for 500 or 600 years, right? And so it was, in essence, a young, like, think of it as a child. In other words, this is our common mother. This is mom. Biblical Judaism is Judaism's mother and Christianity's mother, isn't it?
Right.
Do you have the book of Leviticus?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we have the book of Leviticus?
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that our history?
Yeah.
Is it your history?
Yeah.
Thank you. So this is our common mother, right? Judaism, as we practice it, was maybe 300, 400 years old when Christianity was born. And what I tell people is, we were a toddler when you were born, when Christianity was born, and mommy died giving birth to you. So we didn't know we were sisters. We didn't know it. We were 3 years old. We were 4 years old. You were a newborn. We didn't know. We grew up separately, right? We grew up parted, but we're sisters, and we're on the same leg, and we have the same mother. Yeah? How did that work out?
A question,
Yes,
just a thought. Why do you say sisters?
just the way I teach it, just sisters. You want to be brothers? Brother. I just feel siblings, sisters. I just like the sisters image, that's all.
Why do you call it biblical Judaism?
Because biblical, because what's in the Bible? The Bible has sacrifices. The Bible has the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert. Right? We don't have that. The Bible has the building of the temple, right?
So you're speaking though, I'm wondering, why don't you call it the Torahism or something instead of, to me, biblical means the Christian Bible, but you don't see it that way.
Well, if you look at a Bible, which is Christian, if you look at a Christian Bible, it's 80% the Senior Testament.
Right.
Right. Right. So well, I don't know. What?
Good point.
Okay.
Because she sees that one way, you see it there.
Right, but it's still your common root.
Oh,
It's
I don't
biblical.
doubt any of that, what you're saying. I just was surprised when you said biblical, because I'm picturing the Bible and you're
Including the Junior and the Senior Testaments,
Also,
of
the
course.
prophets are in the Bible.
The
too.
prophets are in the, yeah, but it is
It's
biblical.
Torah Judaism.
It's, but see, this is,
The Bible?
this is,
Your Torah isn't the Bible.
Holy Spirit.
No, the Torah is the Torah.
Yeah.
And then there's what's called the Tanakh, which is the Torah and the prophets and the writings,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
Ecclesiastes and, all the Psalms, everything. Yeah.
Now, some of my Jewish friends would just call it the Holy Scriptures, with the Torah and the Tanakh and the prophets. They would use the term when we studied
Right.
the Holy Scriptures.
Right. Well, I just see, here's the thing. You have to see in modern Judaism, Torah Judaism is what Orthodox people call themselves. They say they're Torah true Jews, or they practice Torah Judaism, which they really don't. It's just really funny because it's the opposite. Because you're Torah true, yeah? When's the last time you stoned someone who was carrying on the Sabbath? When's the last time you had a woman who you suspected of adultery and you made her drink liquid lead? When's the last time you did that? You didn't ever do that. So don't tell me you're Torah Jews. You're not, okay? That's done. But this is just my terminology. If you don't love it, you cannot use it.
Oh, I love it. I just had a question about it, that's all.
No, it's a very good, I never had
Are
a,
you thinking biblical because you're thinking Bible meaning Old and New Testament?
Yes.
And this-
Book, the
and
book.
when you're saying biblical here, we're thinking, well, that's just Old Testament. and
Yes.
We're not used to referring Old Testament. When we're thinking Bible, it includes New Testament
but
too.
we're not even at the birth of Jesus yet. We're right at the birth of him. So this is all there is the old. Then it's not written yet. That happens over here. That happens on this leg. It didn't happen yet.
Yeah.
Right? And by the year 70, there may be one book that was written, by the year 70, one of the gospels might have been written down. But it didn't exist. So I'm still in this time frame. Phew.
I'm with you.
Okay, now we're good. Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
one question. On your drawing there, you have the leg that's the prophetic leg of Judaism, and then it develops into modern. When were the books written that are part of the prophetic leg?
The prophets,
Yeah.
3rd, 4th century BC. I have the dates of the prophets on here on the timeline.
Yeah.
You have 765 to 586 BC from Amos to Jeremiah, roughly. Yeah. So they might not have been written down exactly at that time. It could have been written a little later, a little closer to our time. But yeah.
I thought it was after the second.
And then, and then when would you say is the modern Judaism branching off from what you're calling prophetic?
I'll get to that, but modern Judaism really only flourished. I mean, it's kind of it percolates and it percolates and it has its own sort of secret life, if you will. I mean, in Babylonia, they do certain things. In other parts of Asia Minor, there's Jewish communities that begin to do synagogue things and community things and don't do sacrifices anymore. It takes a long time to evolve and to change. But when the temple is destroyed and when the priesthood it was absolutely, there was a void, there was a vacuum. They had to fill it. And this is how they filled it. And I'm going to get to how that happens and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and all these different things of how that occurred. Yeah, Jen.
As I say, this teaching has really given me clarity because I had a misconception that it wasn't until the second temple was destroyed that your prophetic leg was brought about. But you showed me with your timeline how it was all started way back when and was percolating. So then when the temple was destroyed, I mean, everybody had to go that way, not just those that had already begun.
Right. It really is. And you go back to the Psalm, how can we sing our God song in a strange land? And the answer to that is this. That's the answer to that question. Right. And I love that piece. These are little gems like I'm trying to give you that you can remember really easily, like keys, keys to open it up. So into this world of Roman corruption and Roman occupation and Roman murder and Roman if you couldn't pay your debt, they would kill you. Also children I mean, the Typerian rock, if a kid was born deformed, they would put the kid out to kill them. Basically, they would die from exposure. So they practiced child sacrifice in a different sort of way, not actively, but passively. The Romans did that. Yeah. That was the Typerian. There was a place called the Typerian rock where you would put your child and then they would cry for a certain number of hours and then they would not. So this is the world that Jesus is born into. Yeah. And he was born a Methodist, right? No?
No.
What? No? Presbyterian? Episcopalian. Maybe he was a Lutheran, maybe, okay. Wait a minute, he was born before the Reformation, so he had to be Catholic, right? Because he goes back farther, no. He was born a Jew, he lived as a Jew, his parents were Jewish, his country was Jewish, his disciples were Jewish, his language was Greek also, but Aramaic and Hebrew. He wore a tallis and tefillin. He said the Shema, and he died as a Jew.
We got a hand up on Zoom.
And, oh, okay. So, okay. You have to unmute yourself. She probably wants to hear the music going on in the other room. It's really good. You have to unmute yourself. Okay. Go ahead, Melinda.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was the question again?
It's your question, I thought.
Oh, no, I guess not. Sorry, my hand went up before the before the class started. But yeah,
You've had your hand up the entire time? Oh,
it was up from them till now. Don't worry about me.
okay.
It's okay.
We do. Okay, so,
Everything's fine.
okay. So I have another hand up here, which I'm gonna get to next time. I'll give you a sneak preview. I just did this. I dated it, so you know I just made it for you. 8/16/22. So it says, how Jewish was Jesus? Was his mother Jewish?
Yes.
Did he go to synagogue regularly?
Yes.
Did he have a good Jewish education?
Yes.
Could he read Hebrew?
Yes.
Could he read Aramaic?
Yes.
Was he familiar with the Torah?
Yes.
Could he read from it?
Yes.
Could he read from the prophets in Hebrew?
Yes.
Did he live in a Jewish neighborhood?
Yes.
Did he have Jewish friends?
Yes.
Did he pray in Hebrew?
Yes.
Did he pray in Aramaic?
Yes.
We know he prayed in Aramaic. It's the last thing, right? Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. We know he prayed in Aramaic. Did he keep kosher?
Yes.
Yes. Did he keep the Sabbath?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, mostly. I think he definitely kept the Sabbath. No question about it. I think, walking through a field of grain and you're hungry and you're eating, or if you heal someone, nowadays, if someone is sick, again, this happened to me, okay, not to me, but I mean, in my school, okay, the head of this, it was an Orthodox yeshiva day school, the head, okay, and one of the, in my class was Rivka Kerzner, was a daughter of the rabbi who was in charge of the whole deal, right? Very Orthodox family. We're talking black hat family. And she had appendicitis, right? On the Sabbath, right? He drove her to the emergency room.
Yeah.
Not only are you allowed to break the Sabbath to save someone's health, you are obligated to break the Sabbath, right? It's not a radical thing that Jesus said that the Sabbath was how does it go? The Sabbath
was made,
right, that the Sabbath was made for man, man was not made for the Sabbath, right? So you're obligated if you can save someone's life. And even if it's not life-saving, if it's a serious illness, you're obligated to take that, to drive or to do anything that would break the Sabbath to help that person retain their health, okay? Because if someone dies, they can't keep any of the commandments, right? So you got to keep them alive to do, okay? So did he keep the Sabbath?
Yes.
I say yes. Did he have a Jewish profession?
Yes, rabbi.
Rabbi, pretty Jewish, right? Did he wear a talit? Did he wear a fringed garment? right? The woman wants to touch the garment,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
It's numerous times, right?
Yeah, she'll be you.
So what other things, so between now and next week, think of what other things do we know that he did that are demonstrably Jewish, okay?
His
I mean,
lineage.
this is a pretty good
From
list to
lineage.
begin, huh?
Totally his lineage,
His lineage, right,
both
exactly,
sides.
both sides. So how Jewish was he? I'm gonna hand these out next time, okay? And I think we're good, but I think I have a joke. It says joke, okay. So, and actually it says
Good one.
finish, and I'm finishing, so it's unbelievable. I caught up with all that stuff. So, and partly because I forgot that one book, I think, so. Did I do what?
I'd love to know the Greek influence behind Hanukkah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, well, if you don't have the Greeks, you wouldn't have Hanukkah, because Hanukkah was a revolt against the Greeks. Right, Mattathias is in, what city is he in? Modi'in, thank you. Judy steps up. So Modi'in, and they're preparing to make a sacrifice on an altar, on a Greek altar, which is completely against Jewish law. And Mattathias is a Kohen, is a priest, right? So he, that's the beginning of the revolt against the Greeks. But it was also a civil war between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You have to understand that. There was also a lot of Jew to Jew fighting going on too. That happened during Roman times as well. The Zealots and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, don't even ask.
No, excuse me.
So, yes.
About that story, you find it in the Apocrypha in Christian Bibles,
Right,
but it's not included in all Christian Bibles.
right. It's not in Jewish Bibles either. I mean,
That's right.
that's our tradition, that's the story, but that's not in the list of books that are considered in the Tanakh. No.
It's worth reading, but not
Oh, yeah,
anything
yeah,
theological from it.
right. We read it at Hanukkah time, and the rabbis really downplayed the miracle downplayed the war itself. They played up the miracle of the candle, of the oil, the 8 days that it burned. They made that the Hanukkah miracle, because not very many years later, the Hashmonean dynasty, number one, became corrupt, became totally Greekified. Look, I told you the names of the princes of Queen Alexandra's sons, Aristobulus and Hyrcanus. How Greek can you get, right? So the rabbis played down the victory of the Maccabees and played up the miracle of the oil, right? But a lot of it was, of course, the victory over the Greeks, which was a big deal. I mean, they defeated the Seleucid Empire, right? Not a little thing to do.
Oh, we forgot this one.
There she is, Queen Alexandra. Yay! This is off a coin. Her image came off an ancient coin, right? So there was a question. Yeah.
I just found it very interesting that in the book of Maccabees, the miracle of oil is not written at all either.
Right.
It's only in some other rabbinical writings where it comes about.
Right.
And I can't remember the dates, it was quite a bit later.
A couple 300 years later. Yeah. It starts May Hanukkah, like what is Hanukkah about? And like I say, the reason is that was already after the Roman destruction. They wanted to play down a military option. Okay. You've seen a small resurgence of a nationalistic military awareness, if you will, in Israel today, because Israel's surrounded by countries and people that want to destroy her and kill her citizens and whatnot. So Israel has to defend herself, become a great military power, or at least a moderately powerful military power. But that was never the purpose. I mean, the Jews who went to Israel in 1880, 1890, 1900, 1910, or the ones that came after the Holocaust, they wanted to be farmers and they wanted to grow grapes. They didn't want to fight. They had nothing to do with it. That wasn't what we were about. We've been all through European history and also under Islam, Jews were basically demilitarized and they had nothing to do with it. And we always want peace. You never want war. But if you're going to fight, you better win. So Israeli army is pretty good. Okay, Don, last question, and then we got to. You're holding up a joke, you understand?
No. I'll talk about the Septuagint for a minute, the Greek translation.
Yes.
And how that might have influenced anything, and what does it have any role in their scholarship at this point.
Well, yeah, actually, not the Greek translation, but the Aramaic translation from about the same time. There's a translation called Unclus, which goes back to, I believe it was Philo of Alexandria. Once again, Alexandria, here, the influence of Alexander, he founded Alexandria, right? You know, like if I founded like Jayopolis, right? So the Septuagint was the Hebrew Bible in Greek. Yeah? And because the Jews forgot Hebrew already, a lot of them, and they didn't even know Aramaic anymore so much. The Greeks were very powerful and very influential. And it was their stated purpose to Hellenize wherever they conquered, to make it Greek, right? Greek cities, make a polis, make, wrestling and Greek gymnasium and Greek statues and Greek temples and Greek gods. It was very much how they did things. The Babylonians didn't do that. They took everybody and brought them back to Babylonia. The Assyrians didn't do that. They spread them all over the place. But the Greeks wanted to create more Greece. And we'll get to how that impacts today too, because Greece, the border between Greece and Turkey is still to this day the border between Christendom and Islam to this day, right? So that's a whole nother story, but we'll get to that. Okay, so did that answer? Not really. Sort of. Okay, sort of. Okay. So, yes, good. One more, Deborah? No. Oh, good. Oh, okay. A young Talmud scholar. So you know what a Talmud scholar is, right? Somebody who learned specifically the law. A young Talmud scholar who left Poland for America returned several years later to visit his family. But his mother said, "Where is your beard?" "Oh, Mama, in America, nobody wears a beard." She says, "But at least you keep the Sabbath." "Mama, you have to understand, business is business. In America, people work on the Sabbath. If I wasn't open on the Sabbath, I'd be out of business." "But kosher food, you can get kosher food where you are?" "Mama, you don't understand. In America, it's very difficult to get kosher food where I live." The old woman hesitates for a moment. She's afraid to ask, but in a hoarse, thin voice, she says to him, "Shlomi, are you still circumcised?" Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 again. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay.